I'm a park ranger here in Maine. At the heart of the forest, we oversee a peculiar landmark, an eerie old mansion known as Hawthorne House, hidden amongst thickets of towering pines. The place had been claimed by the Park Service years ago, but it was never promoted as a tourist spot. There were signs everywhere stating off limits, no trespassing, danger. It was like they wanted to put up an electric fence around the property. Sometimes I think they should have. Despite the clear warnings, I found myself constantly escorting curious wanderers away from the area. Their eyes would widen, their breath quicken, and they'd speed off faster than a startled deer after I relayed the tale. I was never supposed to share the tale. I'd been reprimanded countless times, even threatened with termination. Yet I persisted. I wanted to make certain that these thrill-seekers would keep their distance and never return. I'm worn down by the silence, by the apathy. The higher-ups wanted us rangers to proceed with our duties as if nothing had ever transpired. But I couldn't, not if there was a chance that history could repeat itself. I would not allow it. The incident I recall happened long ago, back when I was still naive, unsure of why Hawthorne House was so forbidden. The old-timers had spoken in hushed tones about haunted rooms and spectral figures, but the details were always vague. Whenever I attempted to dig deeper, I was met with stony faces and stern warnings to forget about it. The mystery of Hawthorne House intrigued me. Obedience without question wasn't in my nature, so whenever I had the chance, I would patrol the boundaries of the house. On that particular day, my curiosity proved either a blessing or a curse, depending on your perspective. I spotted a bright crimson tent set up near the mansion. I was sure it wasn't there the previous day. I parked my patrol vehicle nearby and scanned the immediate vicinity, but apart from the rustling leaves, there was no sign of movement. Approaching the tent, it appeared to be untouched, undamaged. I called out announcing my presence but received no response. The wind through the pines was my only answer. I decided to inspect the area around the tent before approaching it directly. As I moved closer, I noticed the faint melodic notes of a guitar being strummed, gently echoing through the forest. It was strange, especially since I had assumed the campers had wandered off. Cautiously, I traced the source of the music, walking deeper into the woods, away from the mansion. The strumming grew louder, and I found myself drawn to the haunting melody. Then I saw it, an old moss-covered cabin half hidden amongst the thick foliage. I could see light flickering inside, perhaps a candle or a fireplace. I approached the cabin, the sound of the guitar growing louder. I knocked gently on the door, announcing myself. "Park Ranger," I said. "I'm just here to check in." The music stopped abruptly, and a moment later the door creaked open. An old woman, hunched with age and wrapped in a shawl, peered at me. "Why, hello there, Ranger," she said, a warm smile on her wrinkled face. Taken aback by the unexpected encounter, I asked her about the crimson tent near the mansion. The woman sighed heavily, her face losing its warmth. She seemed to age several more years as she told me about her wayward grandchildren who loved to explore the forbidden mansion, despite her warnings. Just then I heard a rustle behind me. Turning around, I saw two children emerging from the woods, their faces flushed with excitement. They froze when they saw me, then ran towards the old woman, telling tales of their exploration of the mansion, oblivious to the danger they had been in. I found myself torn between amusement and concern as I began to realize the full extent of my responsibility, not just as a protector of the park, but of its reckless, innocent adventurers as well. Their faces glowed with childish wonder as they narrated their adventure, the old mansion a backdrop in their vibrant imagination. I interrupted their story gently. "I think it's time you both understand why Hawthorne House isn't safe," I said, fixing my gaze on them. I did not relay the true level of fright in the tale I usually spun to deter thrill-seekers. Instead, I spoke about the structural instability of the house, the potential danger of wandering around a decrepit building, and how even the bravest explorers always ensured they were safe first. The old woman chimed in, adding the weight of her years to my words. She shared tales of the past, when the mansion was in its prime, making the children see the beauty in its history rather than the thrill of its decay. The two children listened, their eyes wide, their adventure-fueled adrenaline slowly replaced by understanding and perhaps a little bit of awe for the history of the place they were so eager to explore. That's when things took a turn for the worst. Just as the atmosphere began to relax, A sudden loud crash echoed from the direction of Hawthorne House. I turned towards the sound, alarm prickling at my senses. The children went silent, and the old woman stiffened, her eyes mirroring my concern. A cold sense of dread washed over me as I quickly excused myself, leaving the warmth of the cabin behind. I rushed towards the source of the noise, the ominous silhouette of Hawthorne House looming ahead. In the twilight, the mansion appeared even more foreboding. As I approached, the scene that greeted me was far from the simple structural collapse I had imagined. The front door of the mansion lay in splinters, as if forcefully blown from its hinges. From the outside, nothing else seemed out of place. No collapse, no broken windows, just the unnerving sight of the shattered entrance. I reported the situation to the park authorities immediately. While waiting for their response, I decided to conduct a quick preliminary sweep. I approached the ominous gaping hole where the door once stood, my flashlight piercing the gloom. The mansion's interior was a grim labyrinth of shadow and echoes. As I moved further into the gloom, an unsettling chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just the cold. Something about the mansion felt different, more sinister. I ventured into the main hallway, sweeping my flashlight across the time-worn interior. That's when I noticed it. Strange, dark markings smeared across the walls, stretching from one end of the hallway to the other. It was like nothing I had ever seen, a pattern that was almost deliberate yet chaotic. As I moved closer, the markings began to take a more defined shape, their eerie design becoming apparent. They weren't just random smears. They were symbols, crude yet intricate. The sight of them sent a shiver through me, a mix of apprehension and bewilderment. This was no natural disaster or a prank. Something more sinister had taken place here. I backed out of the mansion, my mind reeling, and decided to wait for backup. The park authorities, upon arriving, were equally baffled by the strange phenomenon. They cordoned off the area and began a more thorough investigation. Back at the cabin, I debated how much to tell the old woman and the children. I decided on a half-truth, not wishing to alarm them unduly. The mansion was under investigation due to some unusual findings, I said, leaving out the part about the disturbing symbols. As I returned to my own quarters that night, the sinister twist left me unsettled. The park was no longer just an enclave of nature's beauty, history, and occasional adventure-seeking visitors. Something had marked Hawthorne House, and I felt a looming sense of dread that our troubles with the mansion were far from over. In the weeks that followed, the Hawthorne House became the center of intrigue. Experts were called in from the city to decipher the bizarre symbols smeared across the interior. Every visit to the site unearthed more of the cryptic patterns, deepening the enigma. The old woman and the children, on the other hand, seemed more withdrawn. I noticed their once frequent explorations around the park had considerably reduced. There was a sense of unease in their demeanors that mirrored my own feelings. One evening, while on my usual rounds, I saw the glow of a fire near the cabin. I quickened my pace, only to find the old woman and the children sitting around a small campfire. The old woman was weaving tales about the ancient settlers of the area, transforming the fire's flickering shadows into spectral figures from the past. As I joined them, one of the children, a boy named Ethan, looked at me with his wide, curious eyes. "Mr. Ranger," he began, "why can't we go near the old mansion anymore?" I exchanged a glance with his grandmother. "Well, Ethan," I began, choosing my words carefully, "sometimes old places like the Hawthorne House have secrets that even adults don't understand. Until we can figure them out, we need to keep our distance. Just like how you wouldn't approach a wild animal before knowing if it's friendly, right?" The child seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded solemnly, accepting the analogy. I felt a pang of regret as I doused their innocent curiosity with caution, but I knew it was necessary. The investigation at the mansion continued without significant breakthroughs. The symbols remained as inscrutable as ever, their meaning and origin a mystery. Yet there was no denying the tangible unease that lingered over the park. Then, one chillingly cold night, I was jolted awake by the emergency radio. A static-filled voice broke through the silence. "All units, disturbance, Hawthorne House." Instantly alert, I jumped out of bed, pulled on my uniform, and dashed out into the biting cold. As my headlights pierced the dark, illuminating the path to Hawthorne House, I steeled myself for whatever lay ahead. The uneasy calm that had settled over the park was about to be shattered, I feared, and Hawthorne House was at the center of it all once again. The path to Hawthorne House was eerily quiet, the usual nocturnal chatter of wildlife noticeably absent. As I drew closer, I saw the flickering red and blue lights reflecting off the weathered walls of the mansion. The area was crawling with park authorities, their faces drawn and serious under the harsh artificial glow. Jumping out of my vehicle, I made my way to the commanding officer on site, my heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and adrenaline. "What's the situation?" I asked, my gaze involuntarily drawn towards the mansion. The officer's face was grim. "We received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity here, but by the time we arrived there was no sign of anyone." "And the symbols?" I asked, holding my breath for the answer. "They've multiplied, Ranger, and they've spread." His words hung heavy in the silence. A knot formed in my stomach as I stepped inside the mansion. The once familiar main hallway was now an alien landscape. The symbols, once confined to sporadic patches, now covered every inch of the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. The crude shapes seemed to pulse in the light of my flashlight, their eerie presence pervading the stale air. As the initial shock wore off, I felt an unsettling realization creep in. The symbols weren't just chaotic markings. They were transforming the mansion into something else, an insidious beacon that echoed an unknown call. The following days were a blur of heightened security measures, inconclusive investigations, and growing fear. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't trace the origin of the symbols or halt their relentless spread. Hawthorne House was under siege, but we didn't know from what or whom. Yet amid the growing chaos, life in the park had to go on. The children and their grandmother continued their existence in the shadow of the unfolding crisis. I saw less of them, but when I did, I ensured to put on a brave face, to act as the rock amid the raging storm. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows over the park, I visited the cabin. The old woman greeted me with a weak smile, her worry lines more pronounced than ever. We sat, sipping hot tea, talking about everything except the mansion. As I was about to leave, she placed a hand on mine, her eyes searching my face. "You'll take care of it, won't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "Yes, we will." Walking away from the cabin, I felt the weight of her trust pressing down on me. As I looked at the distant silhouette of Hawthorne House, its dark form looming against the dusky sky, I made a silent vow. I would protect this park, its history, and its people, no matter what lurked in the shadows of that accursed mansion. And it wouldn't be long before I knew what real trouble lay ahead. Barely a week had passed since my promise when the night sky was lit up by an unnatural phosphorescent glow. The source? Hawthorne House. As I raced towards the mansion, the once familiar landscape seemed alien, transformed by the otherworldly light. The mansion stood at the epicenter, the eerie glow emanating from its core, illuminating its dilapidated form. Arriving at the scene, I was met with the shocked faces of the other rangers. No one spoke, each one of us equally mesmerized and terrified by the spectacle before us. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my gaze fixated on the glowing house. Nobody had an answer. Suddenly an unearthly hum filled the air, a sound so deep and resonant it made the ground vibrate beneath our feet. A chilling realization washed over me. The Hawthorne House wasn't just the center of these bizarre occurrences. It was an active participant. In the days following, experts from various fields were called in, from archaeologists to cryptographers, even a few from the paranormal field. The mansion was combed for any trace of evidence, the symbols painstakingly documented and studied. The glow and the hum became a constant presence, a grim reminder of the enigma we were facing. The park became a hotbed of activity, with officials and investigators going to and fro. But despite the constant bustle, the sense of unease grew. The Hawthorne House stood defiantly at its heart, radiating an aura of otherworldly menace. As days turned into weeks, the situation at the park began to take a toll on its residents. The children stopped their outdoor adventures altogether, seeking refuge in their cabin. The old woman, too, was quieter, her worry palpable. Through it all, I clung to my resolve, patrolling the park grounds, aiding the investigation, and ensuring the safety of the park's residents. The sinister transformation of Hawthorne House had turned my world upside down, but I was a park ranger sworn to protect. I reminded myself of the vow I had made, but even as I steeled myself for the tasks ahead, I couldn't shake off a gnawing dread. The mansion's eerie glow, once confined to its walls, began to spread slowly but surely across the park grounds, turning the once tranquil greenery into an eerie phosphorescent landscape. And then came the night when the hum changed, deepening into an ominous drone that resonated through the ground, shaking the very roots of the park. As I stood staring at the surreal spectacle of the Hawthorne house against the dark sky, I knew that the real trouble had only just begun. The answers I sought were tied to the fate of the park and everyone in it, locked within the foreboding walls of Hawthorne House. It was up to me to uncover them, to face whatever unknown force we had awoken. I wish I could say I was prepared for what happened next, but the truth is, nothing could have prepared me for the reality of the situation. The hum that had been a constant presence suddenly went silent one evening, plunging the park into an unnerving quiet. The unnatural glow around Hawthorne House intensified, casting long, disturbing shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. A sense of urgency filled the air. The experts huddled in, their brows furrowed and faces grim. Words like anomaly, energy readings, and unknown source floated around, but no one could provide a concrete explanation. The park was closed off to any outside visitors, declared a potential hazard zone. The children and their grandmother were moved to a safe location just outside the park boundaries. I couldn't blame the officials for taking the measures, but it felt like an admission of defeat, a capitulation to the unknown forces at play. Despite the escalating tension, I found solace in the familiar routine of my duties. The park, though distorted by the unearthly glow, was still my sanctuary. But every patrol around the mansion felt like a grim reminder of our ignorance and powerlessness. And then, one night as I made my nightly rounds, a tremor ran through the ground. It wasn't a typical seismic shake, but a wave, an oscillation that seemed to originate from the mansion. I looked towards Hawthorne House to see the glow pulsating, the rhythm matching the strange tremors. Just as I was about to radio it in, a sudden sharp wail cut through the night. It sounded like it was coming from the mansion. My blood ran cold. It was a cry of pain, raw and visceral, echoing through the unnaturally silent night. Summoning every ounce of courage, I broke into a sprint towards the mansion. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed open the creaky front door, the cry growing louder. The inside was bathed in the same pulsating glow, the symbols on the wall eerily illuminated. As I followed the cries, a sense of dread seeped into my very bones. I knew instinctively that I was about to uncover the heart of the Hawthorne mystery, and it terrified me. The cries led me to the basement, a part of the mansion that had previously been sealed off due to safety concerns. Now the door stood ajar, an ominous invitation to the unknown. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the glow. What I saw in those depths shook me to my core, casting a dark shadow over everything I had ever known or believed about Hawthorne House. The basement was cavernous, far larger than the footprint of the mansion itself. As I descended the stairs, the hair on the back of my neck stood up as though charged by static. The crying had stopped, replaced with an ominous quiet that throbbed in time with the pulsating glow. The room was filled with the same ancient symbols that marked the mansion walls, but here they were larger, more intricate, almost alive as they danced in the unnatural light. At the center of it all was a large stone pedestal, and on it a crystal that glowed with a light matching the house's eerie luminescence. But it wasn't the surreal surroundings that stopped me in my tracks. It was the sight of the old woman from the cabin, lying unconscious near the pedestal. Her frail form seemed almost ethereal in the glow. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I rushed over to her, radioing for immediate medical assistance. As I knelt down beside her, I noticed a strange, glassy stone clutched tightly in her hand. I pried it free and realized it was a piece of the glowing crystal, but the true horror was still to come. As I rose, intending to return the shard to the pedestal, I froze. There within the stone I could see them, the children. Their faces were contorted in fear, their eyes pleading for help. They were trapped. The grim reality crashed into me. The old woman, the children, the energy, the hum, the crystal, it was all connected. We weren't dealing with an anomaly or an unknown energy source. We were dealing with something far more sinister, far more paranormal. In that instant, the ranger in me took a back seat, replaced by sheer human instinct to protect and to fight. I would not let these innocent lives be consumed by the malevolent force inhabiting Hawthorne House. The glowing crystal and the symbols were clues, pieces of a complex puzzle that, when solved, I hoped would release the children. My resolve hardened. I set to work, studying the symbols, documenting the energy readings, and trying to understand the connection between the crystal and the mansion. It was a race against time, and the stakes had never been higher. The days blurred into nights. The mansion became my home, the basement my workspace. I barely noticed the ever-growing crowd of scientists, officials, and curious onlookers outside the house. I was singularly focused on my mission. My background as a ranger, my knowledge of the park and its legends, became my only weapons in this otherworldly battlefield. I delved into local lore, ancient texts, and paranormal research, searching for anything that could help me decipher the symbols and understand the crystal. My work caught the attention of an elderly archaeologist, Dr. Franklin, a known expert in ancient symbols and artifacts. He became my ally, my mentor in this battle. As we worked together, piecing together clues and theories, we slowly started to unravel the story of Hawthorne House. Days turned into weeks as Dr. Franklin and I tirelessly researched and brainstormed. We had started to decode some of the symbols, piecing together a story of an ancient entity that had been trapped within the crystal, a force that had fed off the energy of the earth, its hum the sound of its yearning for freedom. It was a chilling tale, but one that offered a glimmer of hope. According to the symbols, the entity could be contained if we could complete the symbol that the shard had broken when it was removed from the crystal. Dr. Franklin and I worked round the clock, translating, sketching, experimenting, and doing everything we could to restore the symbol. The park was on constant high alert, the perimeter heavily guarded and under strict surveillance, the constant hum a reminder of the impending danger. Every day was a battle against fatigue, fear, and the clock. But every day was also a testament to human courage, resilience, and hope. We didn't just have each other's backs, we had the backs of the children, the park, and everyone who had unknowingly stepped into this extraordinary situation. In the end, it was the children's grandmother who provided the final piece of the puzzle. Having regained consciousness, she spoke of an old family ritual, a sequence of actions meant to appease the earth spirits, the details of which matched some of the symbols we'd been unable to decode. Armed with this knowledge, Dr. Franklin and I finally completed the symbol and prepared to restore the shard to the crystal. The park was eerily quiet that day, the hum almost a whisper, as if the entity within the crystal was aware of our plan. With the entire park holding its breath, I approached the pedestal, the shard secure in my hand, the completed symbol burning bright in my mind. As I neared the crystal, the hum grew louder, the glow brighter. But I didn't falter. I had a job to do, and I was going to see it through. As the shard connected with the crystal, a shockwave of energy rippled through the mansion. The hum rose to a crescendo before dying out completely, and the eerie glow faded, replaced by the warm, soft light of the setting sun filtering through the basement windows. With bated breath, I turned the shard in my hand. The faces of the children were no longer there, replaced by a smooth, glassy surface. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. We had restored the crystal and the symbol, but were the children safe? Moments later, the radio crackled to life. A ranger reported spotting 2 children emerging from the woods near their grandmother's cabin, disoriented but unharmed. I breathed a sigh of relief as a cheer erupted from the team. We had done it. We had faced the unknown, the inexplicable, and we had triumphed. The children were safe, the park was safe, and the entity was contained. As I looked around at the jubilant faces, I realized that my role as a park ranger had evolved. I was not just a protector of the park, but also of its secrets, its mysteries, and its inhabitants. The world would continue to spin. People would visit the park, children would play, and all would be as it should. And I would be there, a silent guardian, always watching, always ready. My journey as the ranger of Hawthorne Park only just beginning.
Leave us a comment below and let us know what you thought. Please also let us know if you would like to hear more stories about the Hawthorne Park Mansion. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you soon.